We're going to talk about what to do during a recession, or if it looks like a recession is coming. We'll talk about some of the practice areas, the kind of the signs of when a recession, how to find a job during a recession, and whether or not you should even look for a job during a recession at your current firm. The most important thing to understand when it comes to finding attorney work, I think, is that law firms, companies, and everybody are extremely reluctant to hire attorneys that don't have a job. It becomes, I would say, several times more difficult. 5, 10. If you're unemployed, it becomes much more difficult to find a job. Everybody can find a job, and there's always a job for people, and there's always good jobs, but people are very reluctant to hire unemployed attorneys. And so another thing is, if you might lose your job, I think an important thing to understand is that you need to do whatever you can to remain employed, at least until you can find another job. So that means doing better work, working harder, impressing those around you, showing your value, reminding people of your value, and that sort of thing, if it looks like you might lose your job. If you have lost your job, it's very important to understand that the longer you're unemployed, the harder it's going to be for you to find a position. So I see just some of the craziest stuff all the time. I'll see people lose their job. I was working with a guy in Denver recently that had lost his job during a recession. And actually, I wasn't working with him recently. I was working with him during a recession. He'd come from a large New York law firm and moved out to work in Denver, and then had lost his job right at the start of a recession, and believed that anybody should hire him. He only needed to look at a couple law firms. It was just crazy. He was only looking at a few major law firms in Denver, and then he refused to look at other markets. And so the guy literally, was unemployed for I think a couple of years, because he refused to look at other markets. He refused to look at firms that were not bigger than his, and the kind of one that he came from, and was just so concerned about the size firm he was at and all this stuff. And the longer he was unemployed is the problem. It became even harder for firms to get interested in him. So the longer you're unemployed, the harder it's going to be for you to find a new position. So you need to take action. You need to get a job quickly if the market's bad. If you're in a practice area that looks like it's slowing down, you're going to need to figure out, whether the slowdown is just taking place in your firm, or whether it's happening kind of on a much broader scale, meaning it's happening in firms everywhere. There's certain practice areas that are going to be very dependent upon the overall economy for you to understand. And so if there's a slowdown in the overall economy, that's something that can affect your practice area. The slowdown is kind of national as opposed to just local. So one of the things is corporate work tends to always slow down when the economy slows down. It's always happened in every recession. The number of deals and so forth that are taking place in corporate just kind of goes off the rails. Litigation, a lot of times, will be slower in a good economy than a bad economy. This economy right now that we're in is very good, and there's still quite a bit of litigation work, but it can slow down a lot in a good economy than a bad economy. People tend to sue and so forth when the economy's bad, because they're looking to recover money that they may have lost when the economy was good. So it tends to be much slower in a good economy. Patent prosecution is a practice area that's recently experienced kind of an overall slowdown in large law firms, and also in a lot of smaller law firms, because various trends that are happening in the economy. A lot of the work can be done overseas now. There's people that will do the work much more cheaply. Trademark law tends to be active in good economies. It's very slow in bad economies. In bad economies, there may be hardly any trademark jobs. So that's important to understand. Real estate law tends to be most active in easy lending environments where people can borrow money without too much difficulty. It also tends to be very active when interest rates are low. And when interest rates get high, it becomes a very difficult practice area. So that's something to understand. And then technology transactions tend to do well in good economies when there's a lot of kind of activity going on. And then bankruptcy tends to do well in bad economies, but not always, for the most part in bad economies. If the work slowdown is part of a broader trend, you need to understand your standing in your firm, because if corporate law slows down, the law firm's not going to let go every corporate attorney. And if litigation slows down, they're not going to let go every litigation attorney in their firm. These law firms continue to hum on in good and bad economies. The thing to understand too is one of the reasons that law firms are built with multiple practice areas like litigation, corporate, and these practice areas kind of tend to balance each other out. So when you might not have work during a certain type of economy, you may have work in another type of economy, so that everything kind of balances everything out. So if you're in good standing in your firm and you believe that you're going to be protected and you're very close to the right people, and you continually are given assignment, the most important assignments and so forth, then you're likely to be okay. And especially if they're still giving you work to do, the firm's still giving you work to do, sending you out on client pitches and stuff, you're going to be okay. If you work very closely with a partner that manages to stay busy all the time, you're going to be okay. And if you have very rare skills that make you difficult to replace, you're going to be okay. I hate to say it, but a lot of times people that went to the top law schools, if you went to Yale Law School or you went to Harvard or Stanford and you're in a firm where there's very few people like you, then you're probably going to be okay. Or if you have some fancy clerkships and circuit court clerkships or important things like that, you're probably going to be okay. So law firms will keep the best people around during a recession, or the people that look the best on paper sometimes, or the highest billers, or the people that contribute the most. And if you're not part of that group, then you should be worried. If an attorney feels like they're going to lose their job, they need to really be prepared to lose their job. I mean, it means you need to start looking for a job very, very hard immediately. I recommend that every attorney always keep their ear to the ground. Law Crossing is a very good site for that, because Law Crossing looks at every job that's out there. It looks at every law firm, every company, every public interest organization, looks at their websites every day. We have over 100 employees doing that, and we'll find openings for you. So that can be helpful. Another thing that's very good is to speak with legal recruiters. Legal recruiters will also help you. BCG is a placement firm, not a legal recruiting firm. So what we do is we specialize in placing you, meaning we look at all the openings and every past opening and every firm that could be a good fit for you, and we try to get you in to interview with them. So that's very helpful if you work with a legal placement agency, and there's not really anything else like BCG out there. You can network with your colleagues. It's always a good idea to network. Networking is a very effective way to get a position. If you know people that will protect you and vouch for you, people are always more likely to hire people that they know and they're close to than people that they don't. You can investigate in-house government opportunities and other things in different practice areas. Speaking with clients, I know of a lot of attorneys that have gotten jobs with clients during bad economies. I know of attorneys that have been recommended to go to work for another attorney's client at another firm that they knew by networking, so that can be very helpful. You should look for jobs in other cities and markets. You should always keep your ear to the ground, and you should look at employers of all sizes. I mean, you should make sure you stay employed. There's always an explanation for going to a smaller firm or a different market that you can give later on, but your objective is to protect yourself in your resume. It's important to avoid having gaps on your resume, just because the biggest thing is law firms and other people that are looking at you in the future realize that the only people that are let go during recessions are the people that are not the most desirable. And you don't want to be seen as the least desirable. It's also, if you're let go, then it also shows you haven't networked enough and you don't know enough people. There's not enough people willing to protect you and vouch for your work. That can be very, very harmful. And then the other thing is you're not resourceful enough to find another job. So imagine if you had a client that lost their job, you would be expected to be very resourceful. An attorney would be expected to go out there and do everything they could to find that person a job. If you can't do that for yourself, then that's a problem. So those are some of the reasons that a gap's bad. If you want to prevent a gap on your employment gap in your resume, there's different things you can do depending on your practice area. A litigator can go and do a clerkship. There's always clerkships of all sizes, and the federal clerkships and state court clerkships. There's always clerkships. You can apply to the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's all sorts of positions you can do to prevent a gap, and you can explain those. I've seen a lot of corporate attorneys go to business school during recessions. Having a business degree is always a good thing. Business school graduates almost always that are corporate attorneys, when the recession ends, they can almost always go back and practice corporate law, and they usually do because the jobs pay a lot more than they can make coming out of business school. Corporate attorneys can also often get a job overseas or in a different market. I mean, I remember during the last recession, things were extremely busy in like North Dakota, like we were placing attorneys there. It was just crazy because there was all the oil shale drilling, and it was still busy in Texas during the last recession for a few years while it was kind of working its way in other areas. There's always areas that are busy, and there's always law firms that are busy. Corporate attorneys during a recession, another thing that happens is work tends to move from large firms to smaller firms where the billing rates are lower. So there's always work in smaller law firms. I mean, our office, I remember in Chicago during the last recession, I told them all you need to do is like focus on smaller markets outside of Chicago. And they did, and they did better than they had ever done in previous years. So corporate attorneys can get jobs overseas. I mean, they can go to work in Hong Kong or in London a lot of times, especially if they're capital markets. And some of those markets might be good. Patent attorneys can always get another degree, like a master's degree, or they can get a PhD. Well, actually, PhD takes a while, so I wouldn't recommend that, but they can always get a master's degree or another degree. Or someone with a degree in mechanical engineering can go back and get an equivalent of bachelor's in electrical engineering, which might make them more marketable. Patent attorneys can also go to work for the USPTO. A very popular thing of real estate attorneys, when that market is very slow, is they can a lot of times get jobs with developers, because a real estate attorney is going to cost the developer a lot less money than it would necessarily cost them to hire a law firm. Attorneys can go get LLMs. I don't think LLMs are always a good idea, but in different practice areas they can be good. And then another thing is some attorneys go and start families. I mean, it's more socially acceptable, I think, for women to take time off for that, but I mean, that's something that works too. If a slowdown is only in the attorney's firm, they need to understand if those problems are something that are significant enough for them to leave, to require to leave. A lot of times what will happen in firms is the most powerful lawyers will start leaving. And if the most powerful lawyers with the most business start leaving, that's a bad sign, because they take their business with them. They may be leaving because of the reputation of the firm, they may be leaving because of some scandal, they may be leaving because the firm is maxed out in terms of its credit and doesn't have any money. Who knows? I mean, but if that happens, that's a big deal, and most of the time you should follow suit. Not all the time, but most of the time, if partners are jumping ship, then maybe those attorneys should be too. Another condition I think inside a law firm they should be concerned about is if the practice area is slowing down. A lot of times there could be a major slowdown in a practice area in a certain firm, like they may be losing clients in that practice area. That can be a concern. They may lose a huge client that gave them like employee benefits work, or they may lose a huge client that gave them a lot of their employment work, or who knows. I mean, but if they start losing clients, that can be a big deal. Sometimes law firms are just not competitive in their market. Their billing rates may be too high. A national law firm trying to operate in a mid-sized market with these billing rates that are 50% higher than anything else in the market may make it impossible for them to generate local work, and sometimes that happens, and those law firms are bad places to work. I knew of one law firm in Los Angeles that's no longer in business, but it was crazy. This law firm grew to like 50 or 60 attorneys, and it was this guy that had left a healthcare company, and that was the law firm's only client, was the healthcare company he used to work at. And they eventually pissed off this client and lost the client, and then the whole firm just exploded. And everyone at the time thought it was the craziest thing, like this big law firm with one client. If a law firm is overly dependent on one client, that's probably a bad sign. You shouldn't work for them. But sometimes law firms will just lose some clients, and that can be a big deal. I gave a couple of examples in the article of some law firms, Heller Ehrman, going out of business when a couple of big litigation cases settled. Dewey Ballantine, or actually it was called Dewey LaBeouf at that point, going out of business because some partners started jumping ship and they had huge lines of credit and they couldn't pay anymore. So those are some of the things, I think. I think the best way for an attorney to protect themselves inside of a law firm is to find out if there's anybody in the law firm that's willing to protect you and take you with them if there's problems. Those are kind of the biggest things. The best attorneys have mentors, partners have mentors, associates have mentors, but you need to have a mentor, and you need to be close to people that have a lot of work. That's the first thing. Try to be close to someone, hope that person will protect you, and really believe that they will. If you don't have that, then if it looks like there's something wrong or there's problems, you definitely need to take drastic action, quick action, and kind of rethink your career and what you want to do. And you should start looking for a job. I mean, you need to always be keeping your ear to the ground, whether it's subscribing to Law Crossing and monitoring jobs or whatever you do. But if it looks like there's problems in your firm that they're not going to recover from, or problems in the market, you need to just get out there and start looking for things and not hold back. That's the biggest advice I would give.